When my brother called me a thief in front of our entire family, he was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one. A real, satisfied smile, like he'd been waiting years for this moment and it had finally arrived. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes. I don't post vague things online. I go to work, I pay my bills on time, I show up when people need me. That's just who I am. So when I tell you that what happened last spring completely changed the way I see my family, I need you to know that I tried everything I could to avoid that outcome first. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm the middle child, the only daughter, 31 years old, living 40 minutes from the house I grew up in. I work as a dental hygienist. I drive a sensible car. I meal prep on Sundays. So I am, by every measure, the boring one, and I say that without any bitterness because I earned that boring life. I fought for it. My brother, I'll call him by what he actually is, my older brother, is 43 years old and has never in his entire adult life managed to keep a job for more than 2 years. Not because he's unlucky, because he's difficult, because he's the kind of person who always has a reason why nothing is ever his fault. He got laid off from a tech company 6 years ago and turned that single event into a permanent personality. He's been in between things ever since, which is a phrase that stopped meaning anything around year 3. His wife is a different story, and not a better one. She swept into our family 8 years ago and immediately began the project of rearranging it around herself. She's the kind of woman who gives compliments that don't quite land right. The kind where you walk away from the conversation feeling vaguely insulted, but you can't explain why. She had my mother convinced within 6 months that I was jealous of her. Of what, exactly? I was never sure. My brother's employment history? Their apartment that smelled like carpet cleaner and old arguments? But my mother believed it. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it. My mother, who I drove to every single chemotherapy appointment 3 years ago, who I sat with in waiting rooms for hours, holding her hand, bringing her the specific brand of ginger candies that helped with the nausea. My mother looked me in the eye and chose to believe a woman she'd known for 8 years over a daughter she'd raised for 31. I should back up. My grandmother passed away 14 months ago. She was 87, sharp as a tack until almost the very end, and she was, without question, the person in this family who loved me most completely. She never made me feel like a footnote. She called me every Sunday. She kept a photo of just the two of us on her nightstand, from a trip we took to Savannah when I was 19. And when I found it there after she passed, I held it for a long time before I could put it down. She left a will. It was clear and it was legal, and it had been written with the help of an attorney 3 years before she died. She divided her estate between her 3 grandchildren, my brother, my cousin who lives in Oregon and is largely absent from family drama by virtue of geography, and me. Each of us was to receive 1/3 of the liquid assets from the sale of her house, plus any personal items she designated. The house sold in February. The estate attorney processed everything. The distribution was supposed to happen in April. My share came to just over $41,000. I know that's a significant amount of money. I want to be clear that I understood what it was. Not a windfall, not a lottery ticket, but a final act of love from a woman who wanted to make sure I had a cushion. She knew I'd been saving to buy a house. We'd talked about it. She told me once, in that direct way she had, "I want you to have a real foundation, sweetheart, not to depend on anyone." She knew her grandson, she knew her son-in-law. She was thinking ahead. In March, about 6 weeks before the distribution was finalized, my brother called me. This wasn't unusual. He calls when he wants something, which gave us a fairly predictable cadence of communication. He told me that he and his wife were in a tight spot, that they'd fallen behind on some bills, that he was this close to landing a consulting contract that would fix everything. But he just needed to bridge a few weeks. He asked if I could lend him $8,000. I said I didn't have $8,000 liquid right now. He said, "What about when Grandma's money comes through?" And here is where I made my mistake. I said I'd think about it. I shouldn't have said that. I know that now. Saying, I'll think about it to my brother is like leaving a door unlocked. Technically, not an invitation. But he will walk through it anyway and act surprised when you're upset. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to my best friend about it. I talked to my therapist about it. I ultimately decided that I wasn't going to lend him the money because I had learned, expensively, over many years, that money lent to my brother was money given to my brother, and that giving him money had never once improved his situation long term. It had only ever delayed the conversation he needed to have with himself about why he kept ending up here. I called him and told him no. I was kind about it. I told him I loved him. I hoped the consulting thing came through and that I couldn't lend him the money. He said, "Okay, I get it." He didn't sound angry. He sounded like someone filing something away. April came. The estate attorney disbursed the funds. I received a check, a real paper check, which felt almost quaint, and I deposited it into my savings account. I had a plan for it. I'd already spoken to a mortgage broker. I had a neighborhood in mind. I'd been going to open houses on weekends with a quiet kind of hope I hadn't let myself feel in years. 3 days after I deposited that check, my mother called me. Her voice had that particular flatness it gets when she's been convinced of something and has decided to act on it before she loses her nerve. I know that voice well. I grew up reading it. She said, "Your brother tells me you received your inheritance from Mom's estate." I said yes. She said, "He also tells me that you agreed to give him a portion of it and now you're going back on your word." I sat down. I actually had to sit down. I said, "That's not what happened." She said, "He says you promised him $8,000 and now you're pretending you didn't." I told her exactly what happened. The phone call, the "I'll think about it," the 2 weeks, the call where I said no, all of it as clearly as I could in order. She said, "Why would he make that up?" I didn't have a good answer for that. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the real answer, because he wants the money and he's willing to lie to get it, and you have always believed him over me, and his wife has spent 8 years making sure of it, was not a sentence I could say to my mother without detonating something I wasn't ready to detonate. So I said, "I don't know, Mom, but I didn't promise him anything." She said she needed to think. She hung up. The next call came from my sister-in-law. I want you to picture her face when I describe this, because the expression she was wearing, I could hear it through the phone, I swear, was that particular brand of false reasonableness that only someone who knows they're being unreasonable can produce. Very calm, very measured, the voice of someone who has rehearsed. She told me that my brother was devastated, that he'd been counting on me, that she understood money was complicated, her word, but that family was supposed to come first. She told me that $8,000 would change their lives and that surely, with $41,000 coming in, I could find it in my heart to help. I asked her how she knew the amount of my inheritance. Silence. Just a half second of it. Then she said, "Your brother mentioned it." I said, "My brother doesn't know that number. I never told him." More silence. The estate attorney had sent each of us our own documentation. The amounts weren't discussed at family dinners. I had told exactly one person outside the attorney's office, my best friend in confidence the week before. I said very quietly, "How do you know how much I received?" She said I was being paranoid. She said I was trying to change the subject. She said that this was exactly the kind of behavior that made it hard for the family to trust me. I hung up. I went for a walk. A long one. The kind where you just put one foot in front of the other and let your brain do what it needs to do with the thing that's just happened. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had started to feel something sharpen in me. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter and more durable than anger. I called the estate attorney the next morning. I asked whether any information from my file, specifically the amount of my distribution, had been shared with any other party. She confirmed, as I suspected, that it had not. Each beneficiary's information was confidential. She asked if there was a concern I wanted to document. I said not yet, but I asked her to note the call. Then I called my bank. Here is something most people don't think about. When you deposit a check, especially a large one, there's a record of everything. The check number, the issuing account, the date, the time. The branch, if you went in person, because I am the kind of person who deposits a $41,000 check in person. There's a teller who helped me. There's a timestamp. I printed everything, every page. I put it in a folder. Then I called my mortgage broker and asked her a question. Was there any scenario in which a check could be deposited into my account and then withdrawn or accessed by someone else without my knowledge or consent? She said no, not without fraud, and asked if I had a concern. I said I was just being thorough. I kept thinking about that silence on the phone. That half second when my sister-in-law didn't know how to answer my question. She knew the number, the specific number, not a round estimate, not a rumor, the actual amount. And there were only a few ways she could have gotten it. One of them was the estate attorney's office. I'd already ruled that out. One of them was my best friend, who I would sooner believe had grown wings than betrayed my confidence. And one of them was my brother having accessed something he shouldn't have. I didn't know what that something was, not yet. But I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. 2 weeks later, my mother called a family dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday. A deliberate, scheduled gathering at her house for the purpose of, as she put it, clearing the air. I knew what it was. I'd been to enough of them. It was a trial. My brother would present his case. My mother would play judge. My sister-in-law would play the jury, and the verdict would be predetermined. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for 20 minutes before I drove there, asking myself was I was walking into something I couldn't walk back from. I knew that going meant submitting myself to a process that had been rigged against me before I arrived. I knew my brother would be calm and well prepared. I knew my mother wanted resolution, and in her mind, resolution meant me giving in. But I also knew something they didn't know I knew. I went. My brother was already there when I arrived. So was his wife. My mother had made pot roast. And I mention this because there is something almost comedic about the fact that the most painful conversations of my adult life have all taken place over a pot roast. And I don't think I'll ever be able to eat one again without feeling a cold trickle of dread. We sat down. My brother started talking before anyone had taken a bite. He told my mother, not me, my mother, as if I wasn't sitting 4 feet away, that he and I had a clear agreement. That I had told him, directly, that I would give him $8,000 when my grandmother's estate was settled. That he'd made financial decisions based on that agreement. That I had now, without any explanation, broken my word. His wife nodded. Slowly, gravely, like a doctor confirming a difficult diagnosis. My mother looked at me. I said, "That's not true." My brother said, "I have it in writing." I felt the room tilt slightly. I said, "What?" He took out his phone. He pulled up a text thread. He slid it across the table toward me. The thread was between his number and mine. And there, in what appeared to be my words, was a message that said, "Yeah, I'll help you out when the estate clears. Figure around 8K. Just keep it between us for now." My hands were steady, which surprised me. I read it twice. I said, "I didn't send this." "My sister-in-law's from your number." I said, "I didn't send this message." My brother said, "Mom, you can see the number right there." I said, "When was this sent?" He showed me the date. March 14th, a Tuesday. I pulled out my own phone. I went to our text thread, the real one, the one that existed on my actual device. There was no message like this. There was nothing from March 14th at all. The last text I had sent my brother before his call asking for money was from February, wishing him a happy birthday. She looked at his, showed my mother my phone. She looked at his, she looked at mine. Her expression shifted, just slightly, just at the corners, in a way I recognized. It was the look she gets when something doesn't add up and she doesn't want to know why. My brother said I must have deleted it. I said, "You think I deleted a message that I never sent?" He said, "People delete things all the time." I said, "Okay." I reached into my bag. I had printed the records from phone carrier, call logs, message logs, the complete documentation for my account going back 6 months. I had requested them 3 days earlier, not because I knew exactly what I was going to find, but because that quiet, durable feeling I'd been carrying since the walk had told me to be prepared. There was no outgoing message to his number on March 14th. There was no outgoing message to his number in March at all. What there was a record of the incoming call. His call, on March 9th when he'd asked me for the money, and a record of my outgoing call on March 23rd when I'd said no. I put the papers on the table. My mother picked them up. The room was very quiet. My sister-in-law said, "Those could be faked." I looked at her. I looked at her for a long moment, and I thought about all the times I had tried to be generous in my interpretation of who she was. All the times I told myself she wasn't malicious, just insecure, just protective of my brother, just adjusting to a new family. I said, "I have one more thing." Because here's what had occurred to me in the weeks between that phone call and this dinner. My sister-in-law knew the exact amount of my inheritance. There was only one way she could have gotten that number that I hadn't fully pursued yet. And it sat in the back of my mind like a splinter until I finally dug it out. I had set up online access for my grandmother in the last year of her life to help her manage some of her accounts from her bedroom when she was too tired to sit at a desk. I had used my email address as the recovery email because she didn't have one, and we had set a simple password together so she could log in when I wasn't there. When she passed, I meant to close those accounts. I had done most of them, but there was one account, a legacy savings account at a credit union she'd had for 40 years, that I had forgotten. It still showed my email as the recovery address. Someone had logged into it. The credit union had sent me an email notification, one of those routine, "Your account was accessed from a new device" messages that I almost deleted without reading. I hadn't deleted it because I am, at my core, the kind of person who reads every email. It sat in my inbox until the week after my sister-in-law told me she knew my inheritance amount, and then I went back and found it. The login had happened from an IP address I didn't recognize on a device I didn't own. I called the credit union. I explained the situation. They were extraordinarily helpful. They confirmed that the login had occurred, that no funds had been moved, but that the account history, including disbursement records from the estate which were stored there, had been viewed. I filed a report. I have a case number. I put that on the table too. I put down the credit union's letter. I put down the email notification. I put down the case number from the report I had filed. My mother read everything. She read it slowly, the way she reads things when she's hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something easier. They didn't. My brother said nothing. For the first time that evening, he said absolutely nothing. His wife looked at the papers. Then she looked at her husband. Then she looked at the wall, somewhere over my mother's left shoulder, with the careful expression of someone calculating their next move and finding the options limited. I said, "I'd like you both to leave." I wasn't talking to them. I was looking at my mother when I said it. She understood. She stood up, she said, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in years. A voice that sounded like actual uncertainty, like the possibility that she had been wrong. "I think you two need to go." My brother stood up. He didn't look at me. His wife picked up her purse and walked to the door first, which is the most revealing thing she did all night. He stopped in the doorway. I thought for a moment he might say something, might find, in some unused part of himself, the capacity for an apology. He opened his mouth. He said, "The attorney is going to see this differently." He left. My mother and I sat at the table with the pot roast going cold between us. She started crying quietly, with her hands in her lap, the way she cries when she knows she's done something she can't undo. I didn't comfort her. I want to be honest about that. I sat there, and I let her cry, because I had driven her to chemotherapy and held her hand in waiting rooms and shown up every single time she needed me. And she had looked at me across table and asked why my brother would make something up. I let her cry, and then I said, "I love you, Mom, but I need some time." I drove home. I sat in my parking lot again, in the same spot where I'd sat 2 hours earlier asking myself if I should go. It was dark now. I ate the granola bar I keep in center console for emergencies, and I looked at the lights in the windows of my building. And I felt, more than anything else, tired. Tired in the specific way that comes not from the confrontation itself, but from years of preparation for it. My cousin, the one in Oregon, called me the next day. Word had apparently traveled, filtered through whatever version of events my brother thought was useful. My cousin had gotten something that sounded closer to the truth than I expected, and she said simply, "I'm sorry. That's awful. Are you okay?" I said, I was getting there. My mortgage broker called the following week. We had a good conversation. I have an appointment next month to look at a house in a neighborhood I've been watching for 2 years. A small street with old oak trees and a corner coffee shop that opens at 6 a.m., which matters to me more than I can explain. My brother has not called. I don't expect him to. The credit union matter is ongoing. I've spoken to a consumer fraud attorney who is reviewing my options, and I'm taking his advice carefully and without rushing. My sister-in-law has not called either. I blocked her number last week, not out of anger, but out of the same practicality with which I'd lock a door. My mother texted me on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner. She said, "I've been thinking about everything. I know I haven't always been fair to you. I'm sorry." She sent a second text 4 minutes later that said, "I got the ginger candies." The same kind. I didn't respond right away. I held my phone for a while and thought about my grandmother's photo on her nightstand, and the trip to Savannah, and the way she used to say my name like it was something she was glad existed. I wrote back, "I know, Mom. I need more time, but I hear you. I have not given my brother a single dollar. I have not entertained the idea. I sleep well, which is something I couldn't say 6 months ago. The oak tree street is lovely in the spring. I drove past it last weekend, by myself, windows down, radio low, and I let myself feel the thing I'd been holding back for a long time, that specific, cautious hope of someone who has survived something and is only now, carefully, beginning to believe that what comes next might be good." My grandmother would have liked to hear about that drive. I know she would. She was always interested in what came next.